Welcome to the February 2025. How is it 2025 right now? I have no idea. Gardening question and answer. I'm excited to jump into the questions this month. We have 15 questions that were supplied by our Patreon community. If you are not familiar with that, there will be a little more information on that toward the end. But basically every month I'll go through the top 3 things that you should be doing in your particular growing zone. And then I'll jump into the questions that are supplied by the Patreon community. Some of the Patreon community is here in Florida, many are in California, many in Michigan, Kansas City. So wherever it is that you're from, these questions hopefully will be exciting and relevant to wherever you are in your growing zone. So before we jump into those questions, I want to talk a little bit about the top 3 things to be doing this month in the gardening, homesteading, and food forest world. Now, if you're in the USDA zones 3 through 8, cold temperate climates, thankfully, you are still in winter. And so this is the time of winter when I lived in Michigan, when I lived in Kansas City, that you start getting excited because the seed catalogs are coming. You get a little bit restless. You're checking every day to see if the crocus are coming up, and usually not yet. And so this is the time of year that I started getting excited and a little bit anxious. So if you are in USDA zones 3 through 8, top 3 things that I'd be doing if you could do nothing else this month. First and foremost, this is your final call to prune your dormant fruit trees. So your apples, your pears, your mulberries, all those fruit trees are in their dormancy period, which means the sap is not flowing. So you're going to lessen the probability of getting a bacterial or a fungal infection in your trees. So this is really the ideal time to be pruning those trees. Now, the second thing that I would be doing, especially if you're in USDA zones 3, 4, and 5, is getting ready for maple syrup season. This is the time of year when you got to start watching the barometer, see how the pressure is doing. You're getting the wood ready. You're making sure that all of the burners and boilers are all clean. They're sterile. You're getting all your supplies ready. You're checking all the lines. You make sure you got all your taps ready. This is the time of year to get excited about maple syrup season. So it was one of my favorite things when I was up in Traverse City, Michigan, is getting ready, checking the lines, going down to the syrup shed and just make the sugar shack and making sure that everything was ready. It really is a fun time of year to kind of break up that winter dormancy. So if you have never done syruping before, I would highly recommend giving maple syruping a try. Third thing that I would be doing this month is finalizing your gardening and your food forest plans for the coming year. Don't wait until Easter or Mother's Day or Memorial Day to get started on your planning. Do that now. Get creative. Get out a thing of art supplies and just begin creating, begin drawing, doing diagrams. Don't wait until the last minute. Do it now. Break up the winter boredom. Sit in front of the wood stove and drink some coffee or some hot chocolate and just enjoy yourself. Now, if you're in those warmer climate zones, very different ballgame right now because this is not our dormancy period. We have like July, August is kind of our dormancy period, at least mine anyway. So in the warmer zones, USDA zones 9 through 11, we are full on in gardening season. Now, many places in California, Texas, Florida, we have kind of a midwinter freeze or frost, and then we have another round of annual vegetables. So right now is a great time to be planting another round of seeds of tomatoes, of peppers, of eggplants, of radishes, of beets, minzuna, arugula, the lettuces, the kales. Almost anything can go in the ground now or be planted by seed. And then this is going to give us our annual vegetable garden up until the end of April, 1st of May. Once the rainy season starts and the heat of the summer, those annual vegetables go dormant. So this will give us, another round of veggies coming into this late winter season. So don't lose hope now after those couple freezes or those frosts. We're entering part 2 of our annual vegetable season. Second thing that I would be doing right now, especially in Florida and California, is fertilizing your avocados and your mangoes. Everything else needs to really wait until March, but avocados and mangoes right now are starting to flush out. They're starting to flower. You want to give them a good boost of nutrients. Now, obviously, I like to use a lot of compost. If you want to use a cleaner fertilizer, I would choose something like Espoma Organic Tree Tone or Garden Tone. Those are both really good. They're a chicken manure base is really good. The other thing you could consider is bone meal and blood meal for your avocados right now. And I would space those out by a couple weeks. But avocados and mangoes, that's really the only thing that we're fertilizing right now. Everything else, end of February, even first to middle of March is when we want to do our first round of fertilizing on everybody else. And then the third thing to be doing this time of year, for those of us in USDA zones 9 through 11, is planting some spring annual flowers to give us that pop of color. So Cosmos, Zinnia, Snapdragon, Celosa, all of those things are great to get in now. So you've got really pretty spring blooms, especially Easter blooms. Now we've kind of missed the window if you're wanting them blooming on Easter. You might find a few things, but really you're thinking more early spring blooms to have. So those are our 3 things for each of the growing zones. I want to jump into these questions. We have 15 questions this month, and they were super good questions. So I'm excited to jump into these. Some of these I have not answered before on Q&As. So question number 1, and again, these are all from the Patreon community. They ask the questions every month, and then I answer those here in this live. So question number 1, is it okay for a fruit tree to produce fruit the first year after planting? Technically, I would not let it. The main reason for that is even though a fruit tree is going to try, especially if they're grafted or you bought a larger pot size tree, you really do that first calendar year want all of the energy going to a healthy root system. If the tree's energy is being put into the top part, into holding on the fruit and, growing, it's not giving as much energy down to the roots. So I highly recommend pinching off the fruit the first year on larger fruit trees. So avocados, mangoes, apples, peach, pear, plum, nectarine. Now, if it's a berry tree, like a mulberry, for example, or even loquats, those are fine. Those are okay to produce the first year. Berry bushes are great to produce the first year. But your larger fruit trees, stone fruits, avocados, mangoes, sapodilla, sugar apples, we're going to wait on all of those to let them produce the second year. And really, to be honest, if you have one fruit on the tree, it thinks it has 20 fruit. So don't think, I'll just pick all of them off except one. Well, it still thinks it has all that fruit. So it's requiring nutrient uptake to hold those on the plant. So I know it's hard. Suck it up, buttercup. Pinch off the fruit the first year. But do enjoy all the berry bushes, your mulberry trees, your loquats, that sort of thing. Those are all fine. Fig, those are okay to produce year 1. Question number 2. Do bananas prefer a fungally or bacterially dominated soil? So the background for that question is, generally speaking, if you have a hard stemmed plant, a woody stem plant, it wants a woody stemmed mulch because that creates a fungally dominated soil environment. So think fruit trees, they like the forest floor, basically. They want decaying leaves, they want that deep fungal matter, mushrooms, all that good stuff. If it has a soft stem, so things like lettuce or most annual vegetables, for example, those are going to want a soft stem mulch like straw or grass clippings, that sort of thing. So because that creates a bacterially dominated soil, which is where they're going to thrive the most. Now, when we look at a banana, a lot of times I think people assume banana is a tree because it's humongous, but it really is not. Banana is a berry on an herbaceous plant. So bananas are actually going to prefer a bacterially dominated soil. Even though we say banana tree, it's not really a tree, but it's really a herbaceous plant. So bananas are going to want that bacterially dominated soil. Lots of microbes, lots of probiotics. That's why bananas do so well next to a compost pile or by adding manure, fertilizer, peeing at the base of them, all of that stuff that's going to create that bacterially dominated soil structure. Question number 3. What are some mulberries that are more resistant to root knot nematodes? Root knot nematodes, especially in Florida, it's like the swear word of gardening, and people talk about the RKN, what do I do to get rid of RKN? Nematodes are really not all bad. So let's talk about nematodes first and then the mulberry part of the question. So nematodes is a massive scientific kingdom. There are thousands of types of nematodes. There's a very small number of nematodes that are what we would call bad nematodes, and their job is basically to build the soil. So the way that those root knot nematodes build the soil, they go and find non-native, weak plants, diseased plants, plants that are on the struggle bus, and they kill them. The reason why they kill them is they're trying to create compost and build the soil. Nature is very intelligently designed. And so their job is to be a composting machine. The problem is annual vegetables are some of the weakest, most finicky plants on the planet because they're not native here. I mean, none of these tomatoes, even Everglades, are not native to Florida. They're naturalized here, but they're not native to Florida. So all these annual vegetables or these trees that are struggling from root knot nematodes, they're probably not native and they're probably already on the struggle bus. So to answer the mulberry question, look for native mulberries. Mulberries are native in every single USDA growing zone. Literally every continent on the planet except for Antarctica and the North Pole have mulberries. Varieties of mulberries. So there are ones that grow in zone 3. There are ones that grow all the way down in zone 12. So there are so many varieties to choose from. So look and see what your native mulberry is. The native Florida Black is a great one to use that is nematode resistant. The white mulberry tends to be a little more resistant. So yeah, just find a good native mulberry and use that or consider that for your grafting of your mulberry trees. Let me take a drink. Question number 4, favorite varieties of mulberries so far. Oh, such a good question. So every year I allow myself a healthy addiction because Lord knows we don't need any unhealthy addictions. So a couple years ago, my obsession was mulberries, trying to find every variety of mulberry that I possibly could, collect them, taste them, and then I did this spreadsheet of here's the growing zone, the name, why this one was bred this way, the flavor palette of what I felt like they tasted like. So I got really nerdy in it. So some of my favorites, I would say Dwarf Thai Red is a really good semi-everbearing, about 3 or 4 flushes per year, and very intense flushes. And so the berries get, even though it's Dwarf Thai Red, it's a very deep red, like a burgundy almost. And that one I really like the flavor of. I'm not a big fan of Dwarf Everbearing. Dwarf Everbearing, yeah, it does, give you 4, 5, 6 flushes a year, but the berries are small, not super juicy, not a ton of flavor. I love Super Berry. Chiang Mai 60 is really good. Dwarf Shah Reza is another really good one. So Dwarf Shah Reza, Shangri-La, Dwarf Thai Red, Chiang Mai 60 were all part of a similar breeding program. And so they have very similar growth habits and structures. So I think those are probably my favorite. Flavor-wise, the white mulberry, I love. It's like vanilla cotton candy almost, like really insanely sweet and juicy. And it doesn't stain, your driveway or your cars the way a lot of other mulberries do. So question number 5, my first year peach is fruiting. Is there anything I should do now? Pinch off the fruit. That's what I would do. If you cannot pinch the fruit off, you just emotionally cannot bring yourself to doing that, which I know is hard. If it's already fruiting, I would say thin the fruit at the very least. So no more than 1 fruit per branch on a first year tree. Even if you planted it in a 15-gallon pot size, I would still thin those branches out and give it a good fertilization now. Number 6, should we go ahead and fertilize trees that are already starting to flower, even though it's early? That's a hard one, especially in California, Texas, Florida, because we have such weird winters. So right now, a lot of the peaches, pear, plum, nectarine, a lot of them are starting to flower and even fruit set. If we don't get another freeze, they're ready to go. And so if we don't get another freeze, I'm going to want it to be fertilized right now. However, if we get another cold snap, which sets them back into dormancy, fertilizing now is going to prevent fruiting later on. So it's kind of a coin toss. It's a little bit of a gamble. So usually what I do is if I have, 2 trees that are both fruiting out, like I have 2 peaches, I'll go ahead and fertilize one of them, and then the other one, I'm going to wait until March 1st to do that. So that really is the gamble, this time of year. February is our coin toss month, and you've just got to kind of go with your gut a little bit and see like, okay, do I feel in my bones that it's going to frost again? And if you feel like it is, don't fertilize. Wait until March 1st. But if you're like, I think we're good. I really feel like we're good. Go ahead and fertilize. Now, have I fertilized most of my fruit trees by now? No, I've probably done about half of them, and I do them in February at like half the strength of the soil amendment, and I do my actual amending March 1st. So that's my personal strategy. Number 7, what is in the clover crop seed mix that I was using to seed behind my chickens? So I use a deer food plot seed mix, and I just choose a different bag every single time. The one that I just had the other day had red clover, white clover, yellow clover, daikon radish, purple top turnip, rapeseed. I think there was one other thing. Winter wheat and rye were the main ones that were in that mix. And I use that pretty much year round in Florida because there's something in there that is going to seed. Another one that I really like for springtime is chicory. Grows in most USDA growing zones, great at mineral mining, really good for chop and drop. It's also edible for humans. The root makes a really good coffee substitute. There's not really a substitute, but maybe an alternative, we'll say. But I will say this, you can also just plant vegetables behind it. So what I'm getting ready to do in this next rotation with the chickens, because it's a sunnier spot, I have these things of seed that I just, not that you and I ever buy seeds that we don't need, but I buy seeds all the time that I don't need. And I have this copious box of them that I'm like, I don't know if they're still good or whatever. So I'm literally dumping them in a jar, and I'm going to use that to just throw seed behind it. And there's peppers, there's fennel, there's dill, there's flower seeds that I collected and I didn't label. I got my mess too. So I'm going to use that and just throw it behind there, and whatever comes up, and we'll just see what happens. So question number 8, excuse me. Options to add into foraging systems along the fence line for poultry and cattle. Now, I do have a video, I think it's on YouTube and also on the Patreon as a class that goes through 10 or 12 different fence line forage options, things like Napier grass, Mexican sunflower, moringa, mulberry, a lot of different ones that are in that list. Some of the things that I really like to add into those systems are more of like the ground covers. So yeah, I do like the taller, the tree things. Love the Mexican sunflower, love the moringa. Those are so good for cattle, for forage and fodder. And even poultry, like to throw down the moringa and just set it on the ground and let them eat it. But honestly, think ground covers as well. So think sorghum, radishes, turnips, any of the clovers, winter wheat, rye, amaranth, even katuk. Actually, katuk is really good for milking cows or milking goats because it's so high in calcium. So I would think about a lot of those type of things to be adding into a system to help fence line feed the animals. Utilize as many layers as you can. So yes, have a taller mulberry, a taller moringa, taller Napier grass, taller Mexican sunflower, but also ground cover. So think, what can they eat on the ground? What can they eat really high? What can we do as chop and drop? And honestly, the more times you can send animals through the system, the better. Because things like Mexican sunflower and Napier, once it gets like that woody stem, the cows don't eat it. They'll eat the leaves, but they don't like that hard woody stem. So the moment it gets to be like 4, 5, 6 feet tall, let the cows go on it, or chop and drop it, and then reboot that system again. Now, things like mulberry, I do want those to be bushier, to be taller, to be more of a tree. So mulberry, I think, would be a little bit different. Now, in the chicken world, think outside of plants because they do have a much higher protein need. So think of things like black soldier fly traps, or putting logs in the chicken run, or pieces of plywood or pieces of metal, and then turn the metal over like every day, and then all the bugs and the cockroaches and whatever will hide under there at night, and then when you move it over in the day, that gives them that extra boost of protein. The other thing for chickens, think access to compost piles. Let them turn your compost. Now, I'm doing right now an 18-day hot composting method. I'm not letting them turn that pile. But any other composting, areas, let them have free range and free access to that. Question number 9. When to direct sow seed in subtropical areas for cranberry and roselle hibiscus. Anytime now until the end of March, really. So you want to get those started sooner the better, especially if they're protected in a greenhouse, whatever, because I want to be able to put those outside mid-March, end of March, 1st of April, and get those in the ground. So I like mine to be about 6 inches tall before I put them in the ground. They just tend to be a little bit more resilient. But really, cranberry, hibiscus, and roselle, they self-seed a lot anyway. Like cranberry hibiscus, once you plant it, it's probably going to self-seed and come back on its own. How to control Coggin grass. Oh my gosh. I mean, that stuff's so invasive. If it's a smaller area, pull it. Get the roots out. Don't even put it in your compost pile. Burn it. Burn it, put it in the garbage, get rid of it. You can do horticultural vinegar. So that's not kitchen vinegar. That's like 3 to 8%. Horticultural vinegar is 35 to 45% vinegar. So super acidic. It's basically a more natural version of Roundup. I like controlled burns, putting the burning torch attachment on the end of a propane tank and then using that just to scorch it. You usually do have to do that 2, sometimes even 3 times to really control it. But the key with any of those invasive weeds is do not let them go to seed. The moment they go to seed, you're screwed. You're just going to be pulling your hair out. Number 11. What do we use to fertilize our blueberries with? Oh man, anything. Now they love more acidic. So if you are using a bagged fertilizer, think like Citrus Tone. I always do organic, specifically an organic that's whole ingredient based. Not something like Miracle Grow organic, because that has, what is it called? Soy protein hydrosylate, which is like 30% MSG, monosodium glutamate. So it's mainly salt. So I don't want to be salinating the soil. So I want to use more whole ingredient. So things like compost, coffee grounds you can use, chicken manure, pine straw. So pretty much anything like that to do blueberries. And blueberries definitely, I probably should have added that into things to fertilize now if you're in the warmer growing zones. Number 12, if I over prune a fruit tree, will it recover? Maybe. Generally speaking, don't ever prune more than 25 to 30% of the tree in one growing season in 1 year. Always, just take it easy, take it slow. Don't stress it too much. If you want to help it recover, lots of compost. I would say fertilize, in whatever months that you're supposed to be for that particular tree. In Florida here, March, June, and September are our main fertilization and soil amending months. And then in between that, I would be doing foliar sprays and compost just to give it a good boost of nutrients. That's basically all you can do to help it recover, and pray. Number 13, when I fertilize in February, March, should I use tree tone or blood meal? I use both, to be honest, not at the same time. Now, the thought process with blood meal is very high in nitrogen, which is what we want to use early spring, because nitrogen is the nutrients that gives you good green growth, which is where the tree, height and the bushiness is going to come from. So I usually, for myself, I'll do my blood meal the moment I start seeing leaves start to bud out. I'll do a half dose of blood meal. and then I'll wait for like 2 weeks, and then I'll do Tree Tone or Garden Tone by Espoma Organics. No, I do not get money from them. That's just the fertilizer that I use, mainly because, again, it's a whole ingredient fertilizer. So it's got, chicken manure, poultry manure, blood meal, feather meal, bone meal, magnesium. So it's really a whole ingredient soil amendment and not really a fertilizer. So if in doubt, just stagger them and do a lesser dosage. I would rather, I always tell people in Florida, fertilize March, June, and September. Personally, I would rather do a half dose in March and then another half dose in April, and then June, July, and August, September. You know what I mean? Like, I would rather do a smaller dosage more frequently, but if you can only do 3 times a year, do it in the months that are recommended for you on the gardening calendar every month. Number 14, what nutrient should we be most focused on in the springtime, and what is the best way to get it? Great question. Nitrogen. Nitrogen. I don't care what growing zone you're in. Springtime is green growth, and we want nitrogen for that. I mean, any nutrient is going to be good, but really focus on nitrogen. If in doubt and you don't know what fertilizer to use, compost. Composted manure, chicken manure, cow manure, horse manure has to be really composted well first. But if in doubt, compost or manure, or honestly, pee. Urine. Urine is a 1-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's super bioavailable to the plant. You're not going to burn your plants with urine. So that's a great way to get that nutrient. If you want to buy bag nitrogen, I really prefer blood meal because it's very high nitrogen content and it's a slower release. Now, the key with using blood meal is do not over apply it. Follow the directions that are on the bag because blood meal can burn your plants. So make sure that you don't get it on the leaves and you follow the directions that are on the bag because they're all dehydrated at different concentrations. And last but not least, question number 15, how long do I wait to bury Mexican sunflower, elephant grass, Napier grass so they do not regrow? Also, how do I use vetiver grass to chop and drop? So when you're doing things like Mexican sunflower and Napier, if you let them get to have woody stems, like harder brown stems, they're probably going to regrow if you bury them. So you can either send them through a wood chipper or let them dry until they're brittle and then go ahead and bury them. The reason why I really recommend burying your chop and drop is because if you're growing it for nitrogen, so it's a bean, a pea, a legume, or a plant like Mexican sunflower that uses nitrification to repair nitrogen in the soil, that nitrogen is stored in the leaves. So if you chop and drop that plant and just leave it, when that plant dries, the nitrogen is going to be released back into the atmosphere. It's not going to go down in your soil. So if you really want to use your nitrogen fixing plants, one, they have to be chopped. They actually need to die so the roots release nitrogen, but you also need to cover those leaves to keep that nitrogen sequestered back in the ground. I think a lot of people they plant a bean, a pea, a legume, and they're like, well, I'm fixing nitrogen. Yeah, at like 5%. That's a made up number. It's actually closer to like 10 to 20%. But if you want that 80, 90% of the nitrogen back into the soil, you have to bury it. You have to chop it, drop it, and bury it. So chop and drop is a cool phrase, but it's not actually completing the process. You do need to bury that. So for Mexican sunflower, if it's a woody stem, Napier grass, if it's a woody stem, wait for a few weeks or even a month. But better yet, just cut them back while they're still green stems, and then you're going to be okay with that. Elephant grass and what was the other one? Vetiver. Chop and drop as many times as you possibly can in the growing season. Vetiver, I never let go to seed because it really will spread. So vetiver grass, I cut down, as often as I can. When it's like 3 or 4 feet, vetiver, Napier, all of them, elephant grass, I'm cutting them down, putting them back into the system. Now, vetiver is one, because it's not a nitrogen fixer, I'm just building biomass with vetiver. I don't bury vetiver. I use that a lot in pathways or behind the food forest a little bit. In the front of my food forest, like if this is the front where the viewer is at, and then my trees are back here, I will put my chop and drop behind the trees a lot of times and keep the front more wood chipped and decorative because it's just nicer on the eye. and so my chop and drop, I do bury it. I keep it hidden back a little bit because I do like the cleaner look in most of my food forest areas. But again, it's totally up to you. So that is the end of our questions for this month. Hopefully those are helpful to you. If you have questions of your own that you'd like to ask, Patreon does offer a free 7-day subscription that you can give it a try, see if it's good for you, see if it's a good fit. You can binge watch as many of the videos. I think we're almost at 30 different classes on there, 30 or 40 different PDFs and other exclusive content that's on there to really help you on the homesteading world. And there's also a forum there for those of you that like the connects outside of the social media world. I mean, asking questions in Facebook groups is literally a joke. You'll get the most uneducated, ridiculous answers. It's a great way to have a good laugh or to need to add something stronger to your coffee. But other than that, I try to avoid the Facebook gardening groups as much as possible. So if you have never checked out Patreon, love to have you join us there. Try out the free subscription. So yeah, that's pretty much all we got for this month. As always, have fun, and I will see you in the garden.